My name is Ava, and I run a real estate firm that I built from nothing. It started with a laptop on a borrowed desk and weekends full of rejection. Now I negotiate six-figure deals in heels I bought myself, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I finally could. I was already 5 minutes late. Not because I didn't care, but because I'd spent the last hour fixing my hair over and over, staring into a mirror, trying to convince myself I belonged. The restaurant was the kind you only go to for anniversaries, or the kind of birthdays where someone gets engaged at the end. Gold accents on the walls, white linen on the tables, and waiters who only spoke in a whisper. Everyone was already seated when I arrived. I stood at the edge of the table holding a small wrapped gift in my hand, my heels sinking slightly into the thick carpet. My mother looked up, and for a moment I thought she'd smile. But she didn't. She looked me over, like I was someone she'd forgotten to uninvite. Then with that familiar curve of disdain at the corner of her mouth, she said it. "This table's for family only." My smile twitched. My hand froze in midair. Everyone heard her, or maybe they were just waiting for her to say it. No one corrected her. Not my dad, who adjusted his napkin like nothing was wrong. Not my sister, who smirked behind her wine glass. Not my brother, who kept tapping his phone beneath the tablecloth. I stood there, still holding that gift. It wasn't big, just a bottle of perfume I'd picked up in Boston after closing my first solo real estate deal. I chose it because she used to wear something like it when I was younger. She used to smell like grace. Now she smelled like bitterness wrapped in Chanel. A waiter appeared behind me. He looked confused. I didn't blame him. I must have looked like someone who walked in off the street. She pointed again, this time to a metal fold-out chair by the service station. It was positioned between a tray of dirty dishes and a swinging kitchen door. My seat. I took a breath, nodded slightly, and walked over. The chair creaked under me. It wobbled every time I shifted. My view was of a stained wall and a garbage bin. A busboy scraped leftover food into a bucket behind me. I told myself not to cry. Not here. Not again. I ordered sparkling water. I didn't even get a menu. Maybe they thought I wasn't hungry. Or maybe they didn't think of me at all. I watched their reflections in the polished wine glasses. I heard them laugh. I counted how many times my name was never mentioned. I folded the napkin in my lap into a triangle, then a square, then just kept folding it until it looked like something I could hide behind. I thought about leaving. I probably should have, but I didn't want to give them that. I stayed. I smiled. I waited for anyone to acknowledge me. They didn't. When the food came, they passed plates around like I was air. No one asked what I wanted. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. The waiter looked at me once with a flicker of sympathy. Then he looked away like he was afraid of being dragged into something he couldn't fix. That night didn't break me, but it cracked something that had already been fragile for a long time. I'd spent years pretending I was part of that family. Years showing up, being polite, offering help, remembering birthdays, and sending cards. But that chair by the trash can made it clear. I was never really at the table. I was always on the edge of it. Always almost. It's strange how a single sentence can echo louder than a scream. "This table's for family only." She said it like I was a stranger. Like I was interrupting something sacred. But I wasn't a stranger. I was the daughter who used to iron her blouses, who packed her sister's lunches, who memorized her dad's coffee order when she was 12. I had history at that table. I had sweat in that family. I just didn't have space. I don't remember what they were celebrating anymore. I don't remember what dessert they ordered or what toast they made. I only remember the way my mother said it and the way everyone else let it be said. That was the night everything changed. I just didn't know it yet, but I would, very soon. Because one day, they would ask for something again. And this time, I'd be the one saying no. Not out of anger, but because I finally understood. That wasn't my table. It never had been. Growing up, I learned quickly that love in our house had a pecking order. My older brother Dylan was the star athlete, the pride of every parent-teacher conference, the one whose trophies lined the living room shelves. My younger sister Lila was the delicate one, always dressed in lace and ribbons, always given the last slice of cake and the first pick of everything. And then there was I. Not the favorite, not the baby, just the one in between. The one who emptied the dishwasher without being asked, who stayed home from sleepovers to help set up birthday parties, who knew the Wi-Fi password, the printer code, and where Mom kept her migraine pills. I didn't resent it back then. I thought it meant I was useful. I thought being needed was the same as being wanted. There were no framed photos of just me in the hallway. In every school picture, I stood slightly off-center. On birthdays, they gave me what they thought I should like, not what I actually wanted. I never said much about it. I just said thank you. I smiled when they forgot the kind of cake I liked. I clapped the loudest at Dylan's football games. I helped Lila pick her dress for the spring formal, even though no one had asked what I was wearing to mine. I once made a Mother's Day card with my allowance. It had pressed flowers and a poem I spent 2 days writing. She opened it at the breakfast table, glanced at it, and slid it under a napkin. That same morning, Dylan gave her a mug he bought at the gas station, and she cried. It wasn't that she hated me. She just didn't see me. And I got used to that. I kept thinking if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, maybe one day I'd shine just a little. But that day never came. And after a while, I stopped asking for more. I folded my feelings like I folded laundry. Neat, silent, and expected. I wasn't the golden child. I wasn't the princess. I was the helper. And in that house, that role was never meant to be anything more. I left the day after my 18th birthday. No one packed me a lunch. No one asked where I was headed. I carried a duffel bag and a stack of college brochures I printed at the public library, still warm from the copier. There were no goodbyes, no hugs at the door. My dad pretended to read the paper, even though it was upside down. My mom barely looked up from her phone. Lila asked if she could have my room, and Dylan didn't even notice I was going. I walked out quietly, because I'd learned by then that silence was how you survived in that house. The first apartment had peeling paint and a heater that coughed more than it warmed. I worked at a gas station during the day and waited tables at night. Some weeks I lived off peanut butter and discount bread, but I kept showing up to class sleep-deprived and determined. I didn't have a car, so I biked through rain and snow, wrapping my shoes in plastic bags to stay dry. Still, I called home on birthdays. I sent holiday cards with handwritten notes. I left voicemails when no one picked up and texts that got no response. I mailed Mom a graduation photo when I got my associate degree, even printed a second copy in case she wanted to frame it. I never asked for anything. Not helpful. Not money. Just maybe a little recognition. It didn't come. But I kept going. I applied for scholarships, worked overtime, and took summer classes. I studied in laundromats and read textbooks between shifts. I taped motivational quotes on the cracked walls of my apartment like they were anchors. I smiled at strangers, even on the days I felt invisible. Some nights I still waited for my phone to ring. I told myself maybe they were busy. Maybe they just didn't know how to say they missed me. Deep down, I knew better. But hope has a way of hanging on long after it should let go. I wasn't running away from home. I was running toward myself. And I refused to let the absence of love make me forget how to live. The chair was cold and shaky, pushed so close to the kitchen door that every few minutes it swung open behind me with a gust of fryer oil and clattering trays. I tried to focus on the table across the room, where my family sat, laughing, under soft lighting, clinking their wine glasses, like nothing in the world could touch them. I wasn't part of that light. Mom caught my eye from across the room, lifted her glass and smiled, not at me, but at something Dylan had just said. He was retelling a story from his college days, and everyone leaned in rapt, as if he were some war hero instead of a guy who barely graduated on time. Lila wore a silk dress and a crown of entitlement. She flicked her hair, glanced at my shoes, and said loud enough for nearby tables to hear that I looked like I'd borrowed my outfit from a thrift store. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel in tone, but it carried that familiar sting, the one that says, "We see you but only enough to mock you." I smiled back, even nodded, pretending I hadn't heard. I reached into my bag and pulled out the small gifts I'd brought. A leather card holder for Dad, a candle that smelled like jasmine for Mom, 2 keychains with hand-etched initials for my siblings. They unwrapped them half-heartedly. Dylan tossed his keychain back on the table without a word. Lila didn't even open hers. Mom gave a thin smile and said something about me always trying too hard. I swallowed, kept my shoulders square, and said nothing. When I tried to join the conversation, I asked about Lila's engagement plans or Dylan's new job, but their answers were clipped. No one looked at me when they spoke. No one asked how my business was doing, even though I'd landed my biggest client just 2 weeks earlier. I sat there folding the napkin on my lap into corners, forcing myself to chew, even though I had no appetite. No one noticed that I hadn't touched half my food. No one asked why I was seated away from the table like a guest who came without an RSVP. I smiled for the photos. I laughed when expected. I even poured the wine when the waiter was slow. But inside, a silence grew louder than the clinking of forks or the jazz humming through the speakers. I wasn't at that table. I was simply near it, tolerated, but not truly seen. The waiter returned with the check inside a sleek black folder, laying it gently at the edge of the table. Without missing a beat, Mom pointed at me with the same hand that had just been swirling her wine. "She's got it," she said, light and effortless, like she was asking me to pass the salt. Dylan leaned back, smirking. Lila tapped her nails on the glass, already half checked out. No one looked surprised. I blinked once, then twice. I reached for the bill and opened it slowly. The number stared back at me over $5,000. I hadn't touched half the things on that list. Bottles of wine I hadn't ordered, appetizers I've never seen, desserts that passed me like conversations never meant for me. I looked up, not angry, just clear. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. I said it simply. "That's not my table." The waiter froze. My mother blinked. Dylan laughed, but it didn't last long. Lila scoffed like I'd said something ridiculous. I stood up, smoothing my dress, adjusting the clutch in my hand. "I'm not part of this," I said. I wasn't invited. I was placed by the kitchen door and treated like a server who showed up unannounced. The silence was full wide, almost sacred. I handed the waiter a card from my bag. "This is for my sparkling water and the tip," I told him. He looked at me, then at the table, unsure of what to do next. I smiled, not big, not smug, just finished. "They'll figure it out," I said softly. "They've had practice making me pay for things that were never mine." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than he let on. I turned toward the exit, heels clicking on the marble heart, beating steadily. Behind me, chairs shifted. Someone muttered my name. Someone else cursed. I didn't stop. I didn't flinch. The air outside was crisp, like the beginning of fall. I walked to the curb without looking back. The waiter followed a few steps behind and handed me a separate receipt. "You didn't deserve that," he said quietly. I smiled again and handed him a folded bill, generous enough to make his eyes widen. "Split the rest evenly," I said. "After all, they're family." And just like that, I stepped into the night. Not empty, not ashamed, just free. For the first time in years, I wasn't carrying their weight. I was walking away from it. The conference room was all glass and quiet power. Sunlight poured through the windows, bouncing off chrome fixtures and polished oak. I sat at the long table across from a line of executives in dark suits, all eyes on the folder in front of me. My company's logo was embossed in gold on the first page. I had built it from scratch. From a laptop on a second-hand desk, from nights spent researching zoning codes and cold-calling clients who didn't take me seriously until I proved them wrong. Every signature on that contract was a chapter I had written in full. As I flipped to the last page, my phone buzzed. Then again. I glanced down. A string of missed calls. First from Dylan, then Lila, then a text from Mom. They charged our cards, but it wasn't enough. The restaurant is saying we dined and dashed. Call me. I didn't. I let the screen fade back to black. My lawyer cleared her throat softly. The lead exec across from me passed a pen. My fingers didn't shake. My mind didn't wander. I signed. The room broke into polite applause. Someone clapped my shoulder. I nodded calm. Not proud, not smug, just steady. Because in that moment, I realized I wasn't tied to them anymore. Not by debt, not by guilt, not even by the hope of something better. They could spin the story however they wanted. They could paint me cold, dramatic, and ungrateful. But I had nothing left to prove. I had walked through the fire they built and didn't just survive it. I came out holding the blueprint for something better. I slipped the phone into my bag untouched. My name was on the documents now next to theirs. But unlike theirs, mine carried weight, built from truth, sweat, and quiet resilience. That day, I didn't become someone new. I just stopped apologizing for who I already was. The boardroom emptied slowly. I stayed a little longer, looking out over the skyline. My reflection in the glass was sharp and certain. No more blurred outlines. No more waiting for a seat. I wasn't outside the table anymore. I owned the table now, and no one could take that away. The rooftop was wrapped in string lights that danced in the early evening breeze. Soft jazz played from a live trio in the corner, blending with the clinking of glasses and warm conversation. A long white table stretched across the deck, lined with fresh flowers and golden cutlery, every seat filled by someone who had walked with me through the climb. There was Ava, my best friend and co-founder, who stayed up late helping me rewrite pitches when I was ready to quit. Across from her sat Marcus, my first client, who trusted me with a deal when all I had was ambition and a Craigslist laptop. Next to him was Camille, my college roommate turned operations lead, who once let me crash on her floor during a rent crisis, and now runs our back-end team like a quiet storm. Nobody asked what I was wearing. Nobody looked over my shoulder to see if I was worth their time. They laughed, they shared stories, they toasted to the future. It wasn't grand or flashy, but it was mine, built on years of grit, not guilt. Chosen love, not obligation. As dessert came out, cardamom cake and handmade truffles, I stood up, tapping my glass gently. The table quieted, not out of duty, but because they genuinely cared what I had to say. I took a breath and let my eyes move from one face to another, taking in every person who had believed in me when I was still figuring out how to believe in myself. I told them, thank you. For seeing me before the world did. For clapping when I won, and for holding space when I didn't. For showing up not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Glasses were raised, laughter rippled again, and someone wiped away a tear behind a smile. I sat back down, heart full, in a way no success alone had ever filled it. This was a table of my choosing. There was no fold-out chair near a kitchen door. No side glances, no hidden barbs, just presence. just people who didn't need me to prove anything to earn a seat. And in that moment, I didn't feel like the helper or the outsider or the forgotten daughter. I felt like Ava, fully seen, fully chosen. Finally, home. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. Another message from Mom. This time, it read that I owed them an apology for embarrassing the family in public. I stared at the screen, then set it face down on the table. No anger, no sting, just a quiet knowing. I had nothing to apologize for. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't made a scene. I had simply stopped letting myself be the punchline at their table. They weren't upset because I'd walked away. They were upset because for once, I hadn't looked back. I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the balcony. The city lights shimmered below a soft glow against the dark, like quiet applause, just for me. The breeze was cool, brushing against my skin, like a reminder that I was no longer confined by anyone else's idea of worth. I took a sip and let the silence stretch around me. It didn't feel empty. It felt earned. I thought about all the times I bit my tongue, all the dinners where I nodded instead of speaking, all the birthdays where I watched everyone else get celebrated while I cleared plates. Not anymore. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need their guilt. I didn't even need their forgiveness, because I had found something far more lasting than approval. I had found peace. I lifted my glass, not in bitterness, but in closure. Then I said it out loud just once, not for them, but for me. You don't owe explanations to people who only love you when you're silent. And with that, I smiled to myself and watched the night settle in. No more folding chairs, no more proving, just Ava, free. And finally, enough.